This episode is brought to you by the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook, the first beautifully designed, fully customizable paper charting workbook designed with you in mind. With 3 years worth of charting pages, the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook has you covered. If you've been looking for a solid alternative to charting apps, you'll love this charting workbook. The Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook is available in both Fahrenheit and Celsius editions, and it's available in spiral-bound, paperback, and ebook versions. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/workbook to order your copy today. That's fertilityfriday.com/workbook. You are officially invited. Yes, you're invited to join us in Fertility Awareness Mastery. This is my 10-week program designed to help you gain confidence using fertility awareness. Whether you're actively avoiding pregnancy or looking to optimize your cycles for conception, we have a spot for you. We start on October 1st. Are you ready to jump in? Head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program to reserve your spot today. That's fertilityfriday.com/group program. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 276. I've got a great episode for you today. In today's episode, I'm sharing another installment of my Fertility Awareness reality series. And in today's episode, I'm sharing a call with my client, Cherese, who was a member of my most recent Fertility Awareness Mastery group program. That is my live group coaching program for clients who are on their fertility awareness journey. In Cherese's case, she was new to fertility awareness and really wanted to get down the method and understand how it worked before she began to rely on it as her primary birth control method. And so you'll hear some of her experiences in today's call, because that's one of the questions I get the most, from women who are transitioning from the pill, really wanting to move into fertility awareness charting, but absolutely terrified of an unplanned pregnancy before they're ready. That's one of the benefits of learning fertility awareness, investing in group coaching with the Fertility Awareness Mastery group program, so that you can really get that down and gain that confidence so that you can be very comfortable in your ability to successfully transition from the pill to fertility awareness and still have the same effectiveness essentially as you did while on the pill. But of course, we go much deeper than that and really go into your cycle and support you to achieve optimal hormonal health, which is then reflected in your charts. So for more information, make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program. That's fertilityfriday.com/group program. And without further ado, let's jump into today's episode with Cherese. And I'm really excited to be here today with Cherese. Cherese is a member of my most recent Fertility Awareness Mastery Group program, and we're actually recording this the day after our last session. So I was excited about that, and I mentioned it in our last session. I was like, it's not really over. I get to talk to Cherese tomorrow. So welcome to the show, Cherese.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here, Lisa.
Well, I'm glad that you decided to come on. And when we were chit-chatting before we started recording, you mentioned that, these episodes really resonated with you. And I was telling you how much I love these episodes because I just really love having the opportunity to give women, real women, a platform just to share their experiences. Because I think for all of us, many of us have had a lot of the same experiences related to our fertility, our reproduction, birth control, but we're often just not necessarily given a voice, especially in a public way. So I'm just glad that we're able to kind of do this together. It's fun.
Yeah.
So I thought it would be, I usually start by giving you just an opportunity to share a little bit about your history. So I'd love for you to share with us when you had your first period, what your experience was like of your cycles, if you've used birth control before, and basically what brought you to join the class at this stage of your life, why fertility awareness at this point?
Mm-hmm. So just kind of like an overview of my history. I am 27 years old, and I'm really excited. I started looking into fertility awareness a little bit more recently because I get married in like 30 days. Of course, I'm very excited about that. But as I was going through the process of, just looking for options of birth control, because me and my soon-to-be husband, we know we don't want to get pregnant immediately. And so just looking for options, I came across fertility awareness. Now, it's important to know I have never been on hormonal birth control. And I think that might be for like several different reasons. My mother was never pro hormonal birth control, and she had a lot of adverse effects. And so, just having that family history, I think that really impacted me, as well as my mother has always been really into natural remedies for a wide variety of different things. And so, I've always been very athletic. So I've exercised and done sports my entire life. I was the kid where my family was outside of the sports club begging them to take me when I was like 2 or 3 years old. So I've been playing sports a long time, and I've had a very active lifestyle a long time. So I think because of that, I didn't start my period until like the end of 8th grade. So that's like 14 or 15 years old. And I think it might have been a little bit later than maybe some of the girls in my class just because of the active lifestyle. I'm not 100% sure if that has any correlation, but I think it does, because that summer when I stopped doing kind of like my sports activities, that's when it came.
Mm.
I've never had really painful cramps or things like that. I sometimes get a little nauseous, but nothing, I guess, too out of the ordinary. My period has always been very on time, I guess. So that has always been great. I think the main motivation for me in looking into fertility awareness has been I just finished my master's degree in professional counseling, and so I look very much into like mental health and all of those things. And I had been researching the adverse effects of hormonal birth control and mental health. Some women that get on hormonal birth control and depression, and just the negative side effects, the weird nightmares that some people have, and just in my work as like a professional counselor, just hearing about that. And so I knew that wasn't something that I wanted for me. But it's really interesting because when I'm engaged right now, and I went to the doctor to get a checkup at my OBGYN. I went to the doctor, and I was telling her that I was engaged and I wasn't going to be on hormonal birth control. And literally in that appointment, 2 different times, I had already said no, but 2 different times she asked me, so you're not going to get on hormonal birth control? So then what are you going to do? And I was just like, okay. I feel, and I share that story because, after everybody was just kind of like, get on birth control, get on birth control, get on birth control. You're about to get married. You don't want to have a kid right immediately. Get on birth control. And it was just kind of like this thing that you had to do. And I was like, there has to be better options for me than that. And it's also important to know I was on medication for acne in college. It wasn't birth control. I'm pretty sure it wasn't birth control, but that medication that I got on for acne, I had a bad experience. I started fainting, and just fainting in public places. When I went back to the doctor, they were like, oh yeah, one of the negative side effects of this acne medication is that it can cause people to faint. And I'm like, oh great, thank you for telling me that. What if I was driving, or, just all of these things. So I've been very wary of like being put on medications even more since then, just because I know my body can be very sensitive and react in that way.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing your experience. I think that it's really interesting, and how much we take for granted the birth control pill, and how much it's become synonymous with, the word birth control
Mm-hmm.
means the pill, like, and how, in terms of how we use the word in language and in conversation. So I think your experience is, how many women have had that experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
That it's just assumed that that's how we're going to do it. I found what really interesting about your story, that part of it was related to your professional experience and your training in the process of doing your master's in professional counseling, and actually doing the research on the link between hormonal birth control and mental health, but you also mentioned that you had heard about it. So I'm curious about that. If you want to just go on a little tangent with me, were you having the experience of working with women who were talking about these things and had identified that it was linked, or was it because of the research that you did that you were actually asking the question, like, have you used birth control? Are you on birth control?
So like I said, I have never used hormonal birth control for me, but I knew just from my professional background that there was a link.
Okay.
From just, like what I've heard, and I know, of course, the research, some people will say there's a link, other people won't say there's a link. So, I mean, I'm not sure how conclusive the research is at this point, but I personally believe that there is a link. And so then I just started asking my friends and different people that I knew that were on hormonal birth control about it. And literally, and I mean, it could just be a coincidence that every person that I asked said that, talked about depression, talked about not being able to control their emotions. And so things that really weren't that emotionally heavy for them became emotionally heavy for them, and they would just go into like this tailspin and like uncontrollable crying, but just not able to like bring it together, right? And then, nightmares and like just weird types of dreams and things like that, to where they just came off of it. So then when I told them, it was really interesting because I asked them about it, and then I would say, hey, I'm thinking about doing fertility awareness. And they were like, really? And one of my friends, she was like, do it. Just kind of like lamenting some of the things that she's experienced with birth control. And so, yeah, I think that was one of the big motivations for me, just hearing their own personal stories.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting. I think so. Every woman kind of has a different experience. So when you were sharing your story, it resonated with just a few pieces of my story. Like, my parents were always, well, especially my dad was always very wary of medication. And I went on the pill when I was a teenager for painful periods. And I remember he would always, like, every couple of months, he would just be like, you still on that pill? You still taking that thing every day? Like, he would just kind of, like, it was these like checkpoints, but it was like consistent. Like every couple of months, it was just like a reminder pop up on my phone, although there was no phones. That ages me. But not in my house anyways. But yeah, it was like this consistent thing that always, it kind of put a seed of like, I don't know if I should be on this like forever. So I always had that kind of sense of like, I'm going to do it for now because I'm like 16 and I don't know how else to deal with this. But like, yeah. And what you mentioned about the research, I find that to be interesting as well, because there are specific links in the research. So when I was doing the research, it was like the pill significantly reduces testosterone levels in all women who take them, up to about 61%, as per one study. So often we think, okay, the side effects only affects some women, but all women have a change in their hormone levels because, of how the pill suppresses ovulation. And also the pill is linked to nutrient deficiencies, and the pill depletes vitamin B6 at such a high rate that you would have to take 4,000% of the RDA, like 38 times what the RDA says every day to like try to counteract it. And there's vitamin B6 is associated with our tryptophan production, which is associated with our serotonin production, which is linked to mood. And so it's interesting because there are individuals that might question the link between the pill and depression, or the pill and anxiety or mood changes. But then you have all of these real women's experiences. So that's one of the reasons why it's so important to me to share women's experiences, because it's like, we can talk about the science, and obviously I think it's really important for us to rely on the science, but we can't discount women's literal experiences over the course of 60 years because we feel that the science isn't good enough, right? So just to speak to that a little bit, because I know there's women who are listening who might fall into the camp of like, well, I haven't seen any research that would indicate that there's a link, but there is like lots of evidence to show how the pill could affect it. Obviously, the experience of these hormonal changes or these nutrient deficiencies, like how you actually experience those, are going to be different in different people. So not everybody like feels depressed necessarily on the pill, but anyways. But yes, so very interesting story, and interesting your experience just with kind of like, you're like, I made the decision already. I told the practitioner that, like, this is what I'm going to do. And on two separate occasions, they're like, okay, but you're not going to.
Well, and so then what was interesting was like, she was like, okay, I guess she's not going to do the birth control pill. Then she brings up the copper IUD. And, apparently that's like non-hormonal. So, now you're going to do the copper IUD. And I was like, no, not the birth control pill, not the copper IUD, like none of it. And so I think a lot of times they discount fertility awareness. And so I said, I think I'm going to be practicing, or I am going to be practicing fertility awareness. And so then it goes into this long thing of how dedicated you have to be, and, how difficult it can be. And I was just like, it's really not. Like, I mean, it's not that difficult. And hopefully, like in the show, I'll share, I knew nothing before I started the 10-week program. And it's once you start doing it and actually do it, you realize, you know what, there's a lot of it that you can learn. And it's not that difficult to learn how to do it, because you start to get into the motion of actually doing it. And more importantly, it's based in like the body literacy. So, I mean, you're just learning about your overall health.
Mm-hmm. Well, and what's interesting in your case as well is that you have only ever been naturally cycling. Mm-hmm. So really, you've been experiencing a lot of these shifts and changes. And there's some, even though you weren't tracking necessarily, I'm sure that you kind of, I would just, like, so you tell me if I'm wrong, but by giving language to the things that are happening in your body and helping you to pay closer attention, in some ways, I'm wondering if it kind of validates the experiences that you've been having. Because, I mean, any woman who's cycling naturally is going to notice that, or even on a subconscious level, that there's different things that happen at different points in the cycle. I don't know. I'm curious about your experience of that, because you were cycling for over a decade before you started to actively pay attention to your fertile signs.
Right. No, I would have to agree. I think for me, it's just been empowering, right? Now understanding and just taking a lot of, I guess, pride in the menstrual cycle as a whole. And realizing, it's not something to be afraid of. I think society sometimes wants you to be very ashamed of it, and not realize the value and the great, amazing things that your body is doing during this cycle. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And then there was one other thing that so your physician, I think, I never want to come across that I'm bashing physicians, which is why I often interview, like whenever I have an opportunity, I love interviewing physicians to get their perspective, because ultimately, even though the doctor wasn't, like, so the doctor's coming from her own perspective. So she's trying to, even though it might not come across that way, she's trying to help you, because she's kind of like, this is how she was taught, that the most effective methods are the hormonal ones, and basically, like, anything that reduces the possibility of user error is good. And right. I think you highlight a really important point. I mean, fertility awareness isn't for everybody. There are women for whom it's just not right for them, either in general or like right now in their life, depending on what's going on. But I think that it's important, as more women discover fertility awareness and start taking steps to use that as their primary birth control method, it's helpful for medical professionals to receive more accurate information about it. If a woman does want to do it and she does take the steps to learn it, it's not too difficult, right? I always think it's kind of, I just think it's really ridiculous to kind of put women in this box of like, you're not smart enough to sort this out.
Right.
Well, let's shift into our session. So by the time we're recording this, we've had several sessions within our group calls, and we've also had a private session together. So we've been on a journey for the last 3 months. And as you mentioned, you started with knowing very little about fertility awareness. Just share with me the questions that you have for today's call. And then, of course, if you wanted to, I know you mentioned that you might want to share just a little bit about what it's been like learning and going through the past couple cycles. So wherever you'd like to start, we can jump right in.
Yeah, sure. So, okay, I came to the class and I had very little, I knew very, very little about fertility awareness. And I knew that, If I was telling my partner, future husband, that, hey, we're about to get married and I actually want to use this as a birth control method, I need to take a class and actually learn it. Okay. Because yeah, you can look on blogs and everything like that and find some information online about it. But I found that the information online, it can just make you all types of confused, right? And maybe a little bit more confused because there are so many different methods of fertility awareness. So like different styles of how to do it. And so if you don't know that, you can be taking like a bit from here, a bit from there, and just trying to put it piecemeal it all together, which just wasn't going to be effective, which I felt just wasn't going to be effective for me. So anyway, I joined the class and 10 weeks, it ended yesterday. And I came in with very little knowledge. Yes, since I was in college, I'd been tracking like my period start date, my period end date. So I had been tracking that, but I hadn't been charting. And so when Lisa and I had our first, we of course did hot seats in the group call, and that's basically where you present your chart to all of the others in the group. And so we did that, but then we also did a one-on-one. And we were looking at my chart and we saw that I had maybe a shorter luteal phase, and also I wasn't seeing any mucus. So I know I was ovulating, but I wasn't seeing any mucus. And so we worked on that, and now I am seeing mucus. And so that is where these questions are now coming from. So my first question for you, Lisa, would be, okay, so now that I'm seeing mucus, is it possible to have peak mucus on the first day? And if it stretches at all, is it considered peak?
Yes, it is possible. So for the listeners, Cherese is just talking about clear stretchy mucus versus like lotiony creamy mucus. So we call the clear stretchy mucus peak. So peak mucus is clear or stretchy or slippery. So it's like the or that can kind of trip it up. So even if it's just like clear, then yeah. Even if it's just stretchy, meaning like it stretches more than an inch, then yeah. This is a great question because I get it a lot, because when you start looking at different resources and seeing kind of the quote unquote perfect chart, it gives the impression that your mucus should follow a certain pattern.
Right.
So a lot of women think, okay, I'm going to start seeing the creamy lotiony type, and then I'm going to start seeing the clear stretchy type. And often we also think we're going to see like a lot of it. We're going to see like cups full or something. Some women just start right into the clear stretchy. So some women, they have their period and then they have several days before they see any mucus, and then they go right into clear stretchy, and then they ovulate and go about their day. Other women will see a little bit of the creamy lotiony, and then they'll go into the clear stretchy. So kind of like this perfect pattern, even though there's no such thing as a perfect chart, which I always have to throw in there. But yeah, so some women will see that other pattern and then they'll ovulate. But there's all these different things that can happen. I mean, some women will have several days of clear stretchy mucus and then they won't ovulate. And then they'll go back to not seeing mucus for a couple of days, and then they'll go back into mucus if they're having like what's called a double peak. And some women don't actually see any of the clear stretchy mucus, and they'll just see the lotiony mucus, and then they'll ovulate, and then they'll go into their second half of their cycle. So yeah. So in your chart here, the most recent one, you had like your dry days, and then you had a day of clear. It was kind of cloudy and clear, and it was a little bit stretchy. And then like one day of like the lotiony stuff, and then back into kind of like the clear stretchy. So that is totally fine.
Okay. Yeah. And all right. That makes a lot more sense. And then I realized that I had put like gummy on one of the, and that's wrong. I just messed up.
Okay. Was it a little tinge of yellow?
Yes. So it was a tinge of yellow. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's not something that
But that was the only, what was weird was that was the only time that I saw it. And let me just look at the notes and see. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, one thing just to note, I'm not sure if you've noticed this, Cherese, but so in the first chart, in the first cycle that we charted together, you did have some like lotiony mucus that, and say like 3 days where it was tinged a little bit yellow, but you didn't really have any of the mucus that you could stretch. But it would seem as though you're having fewer days of the yellow. So it would seem as though overall the kind of like the quality and everything is improving. So one of the things that I always say is that the healthier your cycle, or the more that your cycle falls into the normal parameters, the easier it is to chart, because then your fertile window in a sense is more defined. So when you have, say, so in a healthy cycle you would expect to have anywhere from about 2 to 7 days of mucus, and that can be the lotiony, kind of creamy, a combination of that, and also the clear stretchy type, or just when you're wiping it feels lubricative. So now that you've seen like a change in your mucus, how do you feel about the charting aspect and identifying the difference between the days that are fertile and the days that are not?
I feel good about, or confident about, identifying fertile days and non-fertile days. But I think where I'm still kind of toggling is like peak versus non-peak mucus. I guess I did it right this time. I was just confused on if you could have did you have to have non-peak mucus on the very first day, or just based on like the basic charts that I had seen.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of reminds me of a question that we had in our last night's session about mucus, because one of the ladies in our session had seen like clear stretchy just once, and she saw it the day after her period. And so her question was kind of like, is it possible? Like, is it okay? Should I mark it? Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that might be helpful to remember about charting is there are no rules. Your body can do whatever it wants. There's a difference between like optimal, and not optimal type of thing. But so for instance, you at some point in your cycling life, you are bound to see something once that is kind of different. You're bound to have an ovulation happen quite a bit earlier than it typically does, or later than it typically does, due to any number of factors. One of my mentors, Rosie Chuck, she uses this great analogy that I always share, and it's like with this type of charting, it's really just about trying to take it as it comes. And so it's like the weather, like you can look at the forecast and have an idea of like maybe it'll rain later this week, or you can like walk outside and see if it's raining right now. Mm-hmm. And so just to kind of keep that in mind. So any type of, like you might have, even though the 3 cycles we've charted together, like you don't really see any mucus until you're going into your fertile window. You might have a random one where you actually see a day. You just have to kind of, I always like to share that in our sessions, just so that I think that's part of the reason why it's helpful to have like take a class or like talk to someone experienced, because then it can kind of prepare you for that. Otherwise you have these kind of random one-offs, or something happens and you're kind of like, whoa, like what's going on?
Well, yeah. And then I think, you said this in one of our sessions, don't try and predict your cycle, saying basically like, oh, I normally ovulate on day 17, and so I'm good right now. Well, in this cycle, I normally don't see mucus this as early as I did this time. And so I was kind of caught a little off guard, and I was like, oh, because I was just kind of coasting in the dry days. But I think it's important to actually be checking, every single day, because I think if you're using it as a way to avoid pregnancy, like I am, kind of coasting, that's how you could get pregnant.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you mentioned that. Yeah, no, but I mean, that's why it's really important to shift the mindset around it. Because I know the way that a lot of us would think about the cycle, or think about fertility awareness in general, is that you're really just charting to figure out when you usually ovulate, and then you're just going to follow this pattern. And I think a lot of us that's how we think about it. And that's because the whole culture has set that up for us. We're told that the cycle is 28 days, that ovulation's on day 14. So a lot of women have an expectation that they're going to it's just going to be like clockwork. And even women who have very consistent cycles that are very regular, I think sometimes we overestimate how regular that is, because it's different living your life and knowing, like kind of paying attention to when you get your periods and kind of noting that, versus charting. So because that, like my world is charting, I see the actual charts. So that means that even in the most consistent woman who her cycles are fairly consistent, you could have, for example, like a 29-day cycle 3 times in a row, which I've never seen because usually there's usually fluctuation, but you could have a 29-day cycle 3 cycles in a row and not ovulate on the same day each time.
Mm-hmm.
Like you could ovulate on day 14 one cycle, you could ovulate on day 17 the next, and just have a shorter luteal phase.
Yeah.
So I think, so that's a really important point. So when you're using fertility awareness as birth control, it's really important to remember, like there is a difference between the pre-ovulatory and post-ovulatory phase. So the post-ovulatory phase, once you've confirmed ovulation and you're using a specific method, because of course I teach the Justice method. So you're, checking your cervical mucus, and you've learned the rules about how to, confirm ovulation and how to do your, wait 3 days, and you're using the temperature as well. So you're learning, like we talked about, cross-checking to make sure that both of the signs match up. You have the option to check your cervical position, but you have the option to check your cervical position and also watch those changes to make it match up. And when you're in the post-ovulatory phase and you've confirmed ovulation, pregnancy is not possible. There's no egg, right. It's gone. And the more that you chart, the more cycles that you go through, the more that you it's different learning it in a book or having me tell you, the more you'll see it for yourself. The pre-ovulatory phase is a little bit different because we have to consider all of the days in the pre-ovulatory phase, essentially potentially fertile until proven otherwise. Mm-hmm. And so what you said about, you have to check every day and you have to be aware of how to identify when you start to see your mucus. That's exactly right.
Yeah. And so I'm so glad that you said that, because if you're just coasting, then you could end up pregnant. So
and I've seen it. That's the difference is that for you, this is our third chart together, but I've seen it. I've seen a lot of charts. I've seen thousands of them. So I know that it can happen, and it's not to scare anybody, because the method is effective when used correctly. And I talk about this in a couple different episodes, and I think we talked about this as well. It's just getting into the mindset and just kind of making those decisions ahead of time. So you and your soon-to-be husband have had the conversation about, where you are on the trying to conceive spectrum today.
Right.
And we're at, I don't know what number you're at, but you've had that conversation. So that will guide your actions and how you chart and how you approach your pre-ovulatory phase and all of those things.
Mm-hmm. Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And it will obviously guide how we do our fertile window.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, we talked about that a little bit, and the different options, like there's a menu and all the different options of how to manage it. And then really it comes down to what makes the most sense. So you mentioned that you had a couple of questions. I know we addressed the mucus question.
So, kind of going off the mucus, my next question was okay, now that I finally see mucus, how often am I supposed to see it? And how much, am I supposed to see? Because, you were like, we think that we're supposed to see cups of mucus. And when you said that, I was like, that's me. I do think I'm supposed to see that. Yes.
Well, no, that's a great question, especially because when you learn, when we're talking about all the specifics of how to check and all of that, when you're checking in a really specific and detailed way, when you have a very specific and detailed charting system, it kind of makes it seem like we should be seeing mucus all the time. I think a lot of my clients are disappointed because you start I talked about the wiping method to check for mucus and all that. And when you start doing that, it's like most of the days are dry in a typical cycle. So it's kind of like you're waiting to see something, and it's kind of very anticlimactic sometimes. So, I mean, in a healthy mucus cycle, as I mentioned, 2 to 7 days of mucus, somewhere in there. So some women only have a couple of days of mucus. Some women have several days. In a healthy cycle, ideally, optimally, we would expect to have 1 day where you see mucus that is the clear, stretchy type 4 times. What I know from doing this work is that not all women fall into that category. And I also know that it's not necessary to have that specific iteration. Like it's not necessary to have lots of mucus in order to get pregnant when you're ready.
Mm-hmm.
So when I look at your mucus pattern, to me, it does look normal and healthy. But because you asked the question, ideally, in a perfect world, we would have at least one day where you would classify it as quote unquote all day, which is 4 or more times that you actually see it. But in the same breath, I think I might have mentioned in the group, so I've worked with women who never have clear and stretchy mucus. So there's a certain subsect of the women who I've worked with who, for whatever reason, so the most common reason would be a long history of birth control use, a history of maybe HPV or cervical dysplasia, and some of the women that I've worked with have had cervical surgeries. And in some cases, that changes the degree, the level of mucus that they're producing. So I've worked with women who don't have a lot, so they're seeing it like a couple times on the days they see it, and maybe they just have it for a couple of days. I've worked with women that never see the clear and stretchy. It's always the creamy. So they see like a couple days of creamy, and then they go into ovulation. And I've had clients successfully conceive with just that, never even seeing the clear stretchy. And then after they get pregnant and have the baby, then often they'll start to see mucus because pregnancy has like a rejuvenating effect on the cervical crypts, which is really interesting. So I've worked with women who they didn't really have, like never really saw any clear stretchy prior to pregnancy, and then post-pregnancy they're just like, whoa, this is what everyone was talking about. This is so neat.
I just wanted to pop in for a moment in the midst of my conversation with Cherese to remind you that registration is now open for Fertility Awareness Mastery. This is my live group coaching program where we dive deep into fertility awareness charting. If you are resonating with Cherese's experience and you're really wanting to gain that confidence coming off of birth control, or whether you're just looking for a non-hormonal method that is just as effective as hormonal birth control, but feeling a bit nervous about making that switch, make sure to join us in Fertility Awareness Mastery. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program for details. That's fertilityfriday.com/group program. Now let's jump back into my conversation with Cherese.
Yeah. So you said, like pregnancy obviously has a rejuvenating effect on the cervical crypts, but is there something that people can do that have never had children yet to have that same effect?
Well, I mean, we talked about some of the basics. We talked about like some of the nutrients that support cervical mucus production. So we talked about folate and vitamin A, just to ensure that you're getting enough B vitamins and things like that. We also talked about stress and exercise and sleep. And it might seem for a lot of women kind of like, well, how is this going to affect my cervical mucus? But your mucus is your cervix is receptive to the hormones. So you produce your cervical mucus in response to your rising estrogen levels, as you know. And so by support, like we've already seen a significant improvement in your mucus by you just following those lifestyle pieces. And
right.
We spoke about the level of exercise, as you mentioned. We spoke about ensuring that you're getting enough to eat to offset the exercise that you're doing and all those types of things, which in turn supports your hormone production. So I would say that you're on the right track. And I think it's really important just to say that one of the challenges, like I walk a fine line as an educator, especially with a method that's so detailed with all the charting notations, because I never want to give the impression that your chart should be perfect, and that's what the goal is. There are normal parameters, and when your cycle falls within those, then it's good. So I have a lot of clients who their cycle is like completely normal, like within the parameters, like we have a healthy period in the parameters, we have a healthy cervical mucus pattern approaching ovulation, we have a healthy luteal phase. Yeah, of course, we could see if we could increase the luteal phase one day. Yeah, of course, it would be nice to have like another observation of mucus on that day. But overall, it's like really healthy. And you fall into that category. Like there's the specific things that we talked about with regards to the luteal phase and the mucus. I mean, those are little tweaks that we can make, but I don't want you to think that if you don't have one day of mucus all day, that it means that we have to like worry. Does that make sense?
No, it does.
Okay. because I mean it when I say it, there's no such thing as a perfect cycle, and our cycles are always reflecting back what's happening. So when you mentioned that you're getting married in the next 30 days, so we'll see what happens. I mean, if somehow you're able to like stay on maintaining all that sleep that you've been getting, and you know what I mean, like during all of the fallout of everything. But if you're not,
Right.
and you see a shift in your cycle, it doesn't mean that, oh my gosh, I'm failing at this. It just means that your body is reflecting back what's happening at this current point in your life.
Mm, yeah. And I have seen just like the impact of stress, practicing like more mindfulness types of things to alleviate some of that stress during this process, as well as getting more sleep, the impact that it has had on my cycle.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the best thing that all the things that I suggested to kind of improve mucus is kind of just building on the things that you've already done that have worked. One of the things I've also observed is that when you have a challenge, like in your case, it was like the luteal phase being on the shorter end. Let me
Right.
see. It was like the first cycle that we charted together. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, like 10 days.
I think the next one was about that same length.
2,
So I'm hoping this cycle will be longer.
10. Yeah, like so that was, so in case someone's wondering like how short was it, but yeah, about 10 days. Like all of the things that you've done, what I have typically observed is that if you're charting, you establish the baseline, you identify what the issue is, and then you come up with a few things to kind of go at it. If you have actually kind of hit the nail on the head and you have identified correctly what could be contributing to the cycle irregularity, that then you typically see improvement even within the first cycle after you've made, like the first full cycle after you've made these improvements. But it doesn't typically go from like 10-day luteal phase to 14, like that cycle. Everything is like, so there's typically like a process where
Right.
you'll always hear me saying like we want to give it like, just think in terms of 3 months. Like, not that it's going to take 3 months to see any improvement, but the answer to your question is to kind of continue to build on what you are doing, and then if it doesn't improve or if there are issues or concerns that you have, then you could kind of add in more stuff. But what I don't want to encourage is, I don't want to encourage you to look at your overall very healthy normal cycle and see flaws and see issues when overall it is quite healthy. Because I've seen what unhealthy cycle, like I've seen what cycles look like when there's like big problems, and that's not yours. We just have some minor, just based on my professional opinion, there's just a few like things that we can just improve on, and that's a lot different than like, whoa, you haven't ovulated for 6 months.
Right.
Like these are different things.
Okay. Well, that makes me feel better. Yeah. So that's a little bit of a relief.
Yeah. Well, because you know that as women, especially because I feel like I can call it out, because I'm also like, I have a type A personality, like I'm very detail oriented, like all that kind of stuff. So when you apply that energy to your cycles, it's not always a good thing.
Right.
It's not a test. Like you're not going to get a star at the end.
Even though I will try. I will try.
Yeah. So it's just, just kind of keep in mind the overall parameters. And and then, I mean, another aspect of it would be that if you were doing this for a while, and so, wedding is over, you feel like you're getting enough sleep, like you're addressing all these things, but it's not improving and there is actually an issue of concern, then at that point it would make sense to like have another session, or you know what I mean, or if there was for other, like for instance, some of the women in the group, if there were like more kind of like endocrine, like, or you have a reason to be concerned about a certain thing, then it would make sense to go to your practitioner, because when you are addressing it, you would expect to see improvements. So if you're not seeing improvements, you haven't identified what the issue is yet.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
But yeah, great questions. You can tell I'm just trying to be like that fine line of like, we want to look for cycle irregularities, but we don't want women with healthy cycles being like, oh my gosh, why did I have mucus on day 2? So you had some mucus questions for me. Did you have any other questions that you wanted to go through?
No, I think that is pretty much it. Like, you did bring up the luteal phase, and that is something that I am actively trying to lengthen. I mean, of course, just because I think it's important to have a healthy luteal phase, but as someone who's using this method to avoid pregnancy, more dry days would be nice. And so having a longer luteal phase is currently a motivation for me, especially as a newlywed. So yeah, so I think what I'm currently doing is, I've been taking a multivitamin, sleeping more. I've tried to cut back on the exercise, but I mean, that one is kind of hard for me, I will be honest, especially bringing up my history of having an active lifestyle literally my entire life. So I think that one is going to be a little bit more difficult for me, but I've tried at least. Sleeping in complete darkness. So yeah, I was trying to think of managing stress, I guess. Those are all things that I've done. What is hard about this is I'm like, I want the results right now, like to show up, but I know it is a process at least.
Well, I mean, the exercise, because I think that I was actually listening to the edited version of one of the episodes this morning before it goes live. And it makes me think of that because the concept that I was bringing up in that episode was being in a conversation with your body. So often as women, we're just like doing stuff and not necessarily charting or on hormonal birth control. And so we don't really know how our body is actually responding, because I always say, like, your body can't speak to you in words. So it's not like your body's saying, like, excuse me, you're exercising too much, right? Or you're exercising enough, but maybe you're not giving me enough food to offset it. So but when you're charting, you can actually enter into like as close to a conversation with your body as you possibly can, because your actions will affect your cycle depending on how sensitive you are to it, right? And so, for instance, you could play with that and try different things. So you could try switching up the routine or the amount of days. You could try switching up the type. So looking at the difference between the steady state, so the kind of like consistent running for 30 minutes or, those types of exercises that keep you at the same activity level, versus like more of the high intensity interval that puts you to the max and then you stop. Those two different exercise routines affect your hormones very differently, where the steady state tends to be can increase your cortisol, especially over time. So you can kind of play with those things to see if that makes a difference. And you can also play with your caloric consumption and make a point of kind of like looking at your week and how many days am I exercising, looking at your kind of daily meals, the basics, making sure you're getting 3 full meals, but also considering, if you have a really heavy exercise week, making sure that you're getting more. And you can do that by adding in some shakes or whatever to make sure that you're getting enough protein, fat, and carbohydrates to offset your energy deficit. Because what I've discovered in my work with women, and it's coming out on the podcast, because it just so happens that this kind of 3-month period, like when this episode airs, you'll hear several different episodes that just so happen to be talking about this particular topic. It wasn't planned, it's just how it is. Like, I don't choose women for specific reasons. I just reach out for these on-air sessions and have women, just whoever, is in the program and wants to jump in if I have a space available, type of thing. So it just so happens. But I think, Cherese, you'll be really interested just to hear the episodes that kind of come out within this little period of time, because this is a topic of several. And so it's not that it's not about like exercise isn't good or exercise is good. It's just more about starting to recognize, especially as women, how exercise impacts our bodies, because it is different to men. Having this knowledge now, then when you and your to-be husband are at the stage where you're wanting to conceive, then you'll have the opportunity to really kind of, again, play with it and see what to do. So when you're in that space and you're ready to conceive, ideally you do want to have 11, 12 days kind of minimum for the luteal phase, to just ensure that when you conceive, that the egg has somewhere to implant.
Right.
As opposed to the egg trying to implant and then your period coming while it's like, ah.
Right. No, that makes perfect sense.
But I think you're doing amazing. I think that you're really cognizant of all these things, and just stay in communication with your body, with your cycles, and you'll be fine.
Thank you.
So any last thoughts, comments before we end our session today?
I think that is it. If I could, I don't know, maybe if I can do this, hopefully I can, like give encouragement to people that might have been on the fence about like joining the program or working with an instructor or something. I would say do it. Like I had listened to so many of Lisa's podcasts, and I was kind of like on the fence, like, oh, do I want to do this? Making the investment in doing the program. But I feel like I have learned so much more than what I could have ever paid Lisa or paid to be in the program, right? Like you can't pay to be empowered and be confident about your own body and, confident in your own skin. To me personally, I feel like there's not a value that I could put on that. And so I'm very, very grateful. So if you are kind of like on the fence or you're wondering, can I use this as a birth control method or things like that, I would definitely encourage you to join one of her mini programs.
Well, thank you so much, Cherese. That is amazing. I'm touched. Thank you so much. I love doing this, and it comes out. And I try to, when I design the programs, as you noticed, I do it with as many points of contact, because what I've discovered over the years teaching women is that even the woman who has years of experience charting, we all have so many different questions that come up. And part of feeling comfortable and confident with this method, especially given that it's not something that is publicly necessarily accepted or promoted,
right.
It's really important to create those safe spaces where we can ask those questions, we can feel heard, and where we can just take the time to, because this isn't about reading a book and doing it. This is about combining like the knowledge plus the action. A big part,
exactly.
Like you do all the work. I give you information and then you go home and you take your temperature and you chart your mucus and you do all the work. And I just help you to organize all of that so that you can feel really comfortable with what you're seeing. So.
No, for sure. And then I think an added benefit of being in the class was like my soon-to-be husband, he was like, oh, wow, she's actually serious about this method. So I think we're really doing this. So I think that's a great added benefit.
Well, yeah, I think, that's something that a couple of my clients have commented on, because their partners will be like, you're meeting with Lisa again? Or they get their package in the mail. So whenever someone signs up for the program, they get reading materials and all of that and, guidebooks and things. And so it's like, whoa, this is actually a real thing. It's like, yes, it is.
Exactly. And so, it was already very legitimate, but I feel like it legitimizes it even more. So that's great.
Oh, well, thank you for that. And then I suppose you've answered the question, but what I often ask in the reality series calls is for the woman who is currently on the pill. So she's actually, or she's taken it before, but she's on the pill or other type of hormonal birth control. And she is kind of in that space of should I go off of it or not? I'm kind of thinking about it, but I'm not ready. What, if any, advice would you want to give to her?
I would give her the advice that I would just say is doing her research and then being confident in her body. I think some people who are wanting to get off of it, their body has already given them signs, but it's just listening to those signs that maybe your body has already given you and knowing that there are other options, but then also that there is a supportive community. I think that was one thing that I was really looking for, because we already know there's a huge community of people just saying, get on the pill. You don't really have any other options. But it's so nice to know that there's a community of people that are really encouraging you and answering any questions that you might have. So it won't be just okay, you've come off the pill and you're out there all by yourself, but that there's a group of people ready to encourage you.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I think as women, we were built that way. We just want to be around other women. And that's why hearing other women's stories and having encouragement from other women is so crucial to our success, really kind of in anything, in any endeavor.
Right.
So thank you so much for being here, Cherese. I know that this episode is really going to resonate with a lot of women. So I really appreciate you sharing your experience and being so open about everything. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/276. I hope that you enjoyed my conversation with Cherese. As I always say, I really enjoy the Fertility Awareness Reality Series episodes because it always gives me more time to really dive deep into more of the story. I've said that before, but every time I do these episodes, I feel like I get the opportunity to ask more questions and really dive into a depth in a different way where I get to just hear more of my clients' stories and what really led them to be where they are now, which is delving deeply into fertility awareness charting and really making it a part of their lives. And what I love about it, I've been getting the question a lot, is it possible to teach yourself to chart? Is it possible to do it on your own? And I would say that I don't think that any woman out there currently, like in today's landscape, even who is admittedly self-taught, is really doing it on her own. So even the women who are quote unquote doing it on their own are often part of Facebook groups and in one way or another surrounding themselves with women who have charted and who have charting experience, who are guiding them on their journey, places where they can go to ask questions. So I really question that notion of really truly being self-taught in the sense of like teaching yourself without any help. That's really not how this works for the vast majority of women. The challenge with seeking support kind of here and there from different sources and all of that is that you're not always getting the correct information. You're not necessarily getting the complete information. And you're often getting information from other women who are also on their journey who really haven't yet figured it out themselves. And that can just make the process a little bit longer and trying. And so for some women, they're completely happy and fine to kind of muddle through. Over the course of several months and leading into a couple of years, you can really use the method and from a practical standpoint, be quite happy in your use of it. But what I found in my experiences, whether I'm working with a woman who has just learned charting or I'm working with a woman with a ton of experience who's charted for several years, there's always a ton of questions because there's a difference between what you see in the textbook and what is happening there versus what's actually happening in your charts. And there's more to the story. There's a mindset shift that happens when you start charting your cycles. You go from believing that everything is predictable and the goal is just to figure out, how to predict when you ovulate, to really starting to understand that you're watching and understanding your body's patterns. You can't predict when you ovulate and you really have to learn to go with the flow on that. And so having someone to guide you through that and to help you shift the mindset and also to give you the very specific and complete instructions for how to follow a method of charting that allows you to really understand your mucus and your temperatures and your cervical position, and then take it a step further and relate it to your overall health and help you to achieve optimal hormone balance and menstrual cycle health. That's basically what the program entails. So it's much more than just quote unquote simple charting. It really takes you in depth and you leave the program with a much better understanding and a strategy for how to achieve optimal hormonal health, which will then be reflected back to you in your chart. So it's pretty amazing. If you are on the fence, if you're thinking about it, make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program for more information. And if you are curious about what women are saying about the program, make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/testimonial. And that's where I have listed my testimonials from women who have taken the group program, as well as women who've worked with me one-on-one to really get a sense of what it is that happens. What are we talking about over 10 weeks every Tuesday evening at 8:30 Eastern? So again, that link is fertilityfriday.com/group program. Now, if you didn't hear the exciting news that I released last week, I have released the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook. It is the first paper charting book of its kind. It contains 3 years worth of paper charts. And so for those of you who love charting on paper and we're really hoping to have a really functional and beautiful book to chart your menstrual cycles and to have enough space to write down what you need and just to have it all in one place, then you will absolutely love the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook. So for details on that, head over to fertilityfriday.com/workbook and also to purchase your copy. That link takes you to the main page that allows you to choose which version that you want. So there's 2 versions, the Celsius version and the Fahrenheit version. And those links take you to Amazon, where the book is listed in paperback format, spiral bound, as well as ebook. And so again, that's fertilityfriday.com/workbook. And I just want to take a moment to thank you for tuning into the show. I really appreciate all of you for spreading the word and sharing the show with your friends. Each day, I'm connected with more and more women that are discovering the show and having that opportunity to discover the connection between their cycles and their overall health, shed some of those myths that we talk about all the time about the menstrual cycle, and just really start taking control of our lives. This is really about empowerment, understanding how our cycles work, and getting on with it, understanding that we do have power to positively impact our cycles, our hormonal health, our fertility. We really do have a lot more power over our health than we've been told. So with that said, thank you once again. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.